In our main topic this week on Mastering Dungeons, we are looking at the best of previously published adventures. This week, we take our turn on Princes of the Apocalypse, coming at you in two cameras.
Yeah. And we're holding up our book, which, I mean, what a gorgeous cover. That's so great. The prophet of the air elemental cult, soaring over the skies, and yeah, really cool cover.
For sure. So, like I said, we have been looking at previous adventures, looking at what's good about them, what's great about them, what we can take from them as game designers and use on our own design. 2 weeks ago, we looked at the first real long campaign for 5e, Tyranny of Dragons. Mm-hmm. Then we looked at Red Hand of Doom, which was a 3rd edition adventure that has been considered by many as the best adventure ever written and has been the impetus for other design going forward, including Tyranny of Dragons. Mm-hmm. So now we thought, let's look at the second long campaign that was published for 5e, Princes of the Apocalypse. A little warning here. We understand that none of these adventures are perfect. We are specifically focusing on what is positive about them, what is good about them, what we can take away. So as you say, well, I hated this adventure and it has all these problems. We probably agree with you in some ways. And we have talked about these adventures before and some of the flaws that we found with them, but we're going to focus on the positives for now. I'm going to do my best because I am at heart critical, not in the sense of negative, but in the sense of evaluating, critiquing. Yeah. So Teos, if I start to say, but this, just say, stop it.
Yeah, same things. I mean, and that's what we're trying to do with this series, right? Like, Princes is not my favorite adventure. I rank it very low on the list of 5e official adventures, while also recognizing it's really good compared to older adventures. As you and I have had fun reviewing Spelljammer, Planescape, Dragonlance, and many other classic adventures from 1e and 2e and even before that. And they've got issues when you really look at them at a fair level compared to today's. I mean, these adventures do really well. So you can look at all of these a lot of different ways, and you can look at the great things about them, and you can look at the critical parts of them. And we're choosing in this series to be positive. And yes, that means that you watching on YouTube or listening on your podcast, you may go, wow, this campaign fell apart for us. Sure. I also want to acknowledge that people that I really, really love and admire the way they look at things have rated adventures that are not my favorites as their number one. And then adventures that I think are the absolute best, gift to humankind, they have said, yeah, that didn't work for me, right? Because any of these adventures has some flaw or flaws. And what really will depend is whether you look at that and go like, well, that's cool, I can fix that. Or you say, well, as DM, that is definitely what I expected to be done for me. And there's no way I'm putting in this time to fix this. So this is terrible. And I think that is a big thing that decides whether we as a DM like or don't like an adventure, and why we get completely different results. You and I did a show, I'm about to shut up, but I'll say you and I did a show a while back. We had Marcelo, we had GM Tim on, and overall, we had polled all of our listeners who had run several adventures, right? Not a person just ran one or two, but had run, I forget how many, but let's say 4 hardbacks. And they rated all of these adventures really highly. And I think that's probably correct.
So we're going to go back now. We're going to look at the history of this adventure. Mm-hmm. So when 5e was released, D&D had a relatively small staff. So as with Tyranny of Dragons, the decision was made to partner with a third-party publisher to create the official hardcover adventures. So this project was not Kobold Press. It was Sasquatch Game Studio. And in the credits, you see former Wizards of the Coast designers like lead designer Richard Baker, David Noonan, Steven Schubert. So Sasquatch also brought in help from the likes of Ed Greenwood, Thomas M. Reed, Steve Townsend, Jeff Ludwig, Rob Schwalb. On the Wizards of the Coast side, Rodney Thompson, Peter Lee, Chris Sims, Matt Cernett, Mike Merles and Jeremy Crawford are all credited as contributors, designers, and so on. The overall arching theme of this adventure, of this sort of season as they had back then, was elemental evil. There was an eventual DM's Guild supplement called Elemental Evil Player's Companion that provided the player options from the book in a single document. The adventure goes from levels 3 to 15, although there is some stuff in there where you can start at level 1, focusing on the Desert Valley of Faerun, not far from Neverwinter, and not far from the locations used in the Lost Mines of Phandelver adventure and the first starter set. And if you are listening, guess what? We're going to spoil this adventure like you wouldn't believe.
Yep.
So if you do not want to hear what happens in Princes of the Apocalypse, it's been nice having you on. So, Teos.
Yeah.
What do you think? What's the overview here of Princes of the Apocalypse?
Yeah. So this is an adventure that does the kind of thing that players love to say out loud, like, why isn't there a total on-ramp from the starter set, a clear on-ramp of what I should play, right? I ended at level 3 with Lost Mine. Where should I play next? Well, this adventure did that, right? It primarily starts at level 3. It's located nearby. It's a great segue, and it really does thematically work pretty well to bring you into the same kind of region and same feel in terms of the part of the Forgotten Realms where it's based. It is trying to bring in to Forgotten Realms a very Greyhawk storyline, right? Something that we've talked about before. Greyhawk gets stripped for parts. Well, Elemental Evil is a classic part of the Greyhawk campaign, the Greyhawk setting. The Temple of Elemental Evil has been done in various ways in various places. And now that concept of the Princes of Elemental Evil, the Elder Elemental Eye, this is all being brought into into the Princes of Apocalypse product and into Forgotten Realms. It is doing so without spoiling the secret behind Elder Elemental Evil, which is fine. That's probably good, especially since that is a Greyhawk type secret, though it has crossed worlds before in 4th edition. And to support this, one of the things, getting very quickly into things I really, really like, it has a section towards the end with player options, magic, and monsters. And this is perfect for when this book came out, right? Tyranny of Dragons comes out. You still don't have that much in terms of rules or expansion stuff. And so if you're playing 5th edition and you miss everything you had during 3rd or 4th edition, or 2nd edition, if that's where you came from, you want a little more. Well, here are the Aarakocra, the Deep Gnome, the Genasi, the Goliath, new spells, new magic items. And some of them are pretty neat in terms of what they can do for the DM, like the Devastation Orb that can have wide-ranging environmental effects. The monsters are fantastic. I adored the monsters in this book. They took a much more 4E approach to monster design. 5E 2014 monsters tended to be, it hits you and deals blah bludgeoning. And these are monsters that when you defeat a Razor Blast fire cultist, they explode with fire. There are earth cultists that are riding really cool mounts that burrow through the ground, and just all kinds of neat ways that they interact with you and do things so that you feel their environmental premise. You feel that theme come through in all of the attacks, which is good because at times this adventure can be a little simple. And so this complexity of the monsters keeps those battles being really interesting throughout this adventure and being very flavorful.
Yeah, what I fell in love with, not having played it, except for very few one-off scenarios, and not run it, was this map. This map of the Desert Valley.
Yeah.
I see a map like this, and it's got towns, and it's got big X's, and those X's are adventure sites. But it's also got lots of blank space. And I think that blank space is important, not just on this map and not just in game design in general, but in this campaign in particular. I think that blank space is important because this is an adventure that some game master who wants to take it as a toolbox and not as a blueprint and use it. A lot of the complaints that we heard about it were, one, Temple of Elemental Evil, right? Because they had already played the Temple of Elemental Evil. How dare you put it in the Forgotten Realms? We're going to throw that aside. That's fine. You can tell any story anywhere you want. But the other thing was, it was confusing. I didn't know what to do next. And that can be a problem for game masters, and that can be a joy for some game masters. To get a good, solid set of dungeons, a good, solid set of encounters, and be able to mix them and match them and use them in different ways can be exactly what a game master wants out of a book, as opposed to a more linear style adventure.
Yeah, there's a lot here in this adventure that says, like, oh, go over to this town and handle this little thing. But the town's a big town, and there are a lot of things going on. And so the players can just get up into shenanigans, and the DM can start expanding, which is great. As we talked about with previous adventures, it teaches DMs what to do, right? How to improvise, how to come up with new things, expand the adventure. This adventure, like the last two we covered, also tries to do things that are reactive. When you've gone this far in the adventure, Team Evil realizes you're a problem and do some things, right? Or because you wiped out this one cult, the other cult's doing the following thing. And that's interesting and neat. It's complex. It's not always written in the clearest way, but the intent behind it is really good. I don't think it's as solid as what Tyranny of Dragons did in being reactive. That was a simple format that was very encouraging and supportive. They do a little less talking to the DM here and a lot more just, here are encounters to run, and it's like, oh, great, how? There is also so much going on. This adventure is trying to have an on-ramp for level 1 characters in the end of the book. It's trying to have the town do dual wielding of level 1 and level 3 quests. It's got this Mirabar delegation plot line that can get a little lost. Even though at various points it goes back and says, here's where they are. But it is hard. And I ran this for a group of middle school, and I think somewhere maybe in high school kids. It was really hard to keep them going because the plot, even when like, oh, I guess we found a water cult, let's take on the water cult, it can be a little tough. But that also is where you teach your DM to find ways to keep it interesting and so on. For me, the adventure really shines towards the latter half of it, where the encounters become really kind of interesting and engaging. But there is a lot here that's really cool, and it does serve as a good explanation of the type of wonders the Forgotten Realm has. It has things like that huge dwarven bridge that was, magically created some time ago, lost to history. It's been forgotten how exactly this bridge was formed and how by most people in the area. And you walk across it and hope the wind won't, sweep you off of it. But really neat, and just, cool art that comes with it. So there's just so much that's neat. And I agree with you. The Desert Valley itself is really well done. And yeah. Anything else there, Shawn?
Yeah, I think to go through it sort of more chronologically, we hadn't yet seen in 5th edition, when this was published, a great starting town. Phandalin was okay, but it was a little small, and it was good for a brand new game master who couldn't keep track of too much. Red Larch is a really excellent town. It's funny because I made notes and I came to put them in our show notes, and basically word for word in some points, it was like, yeah, okay, that's what I said. That's what I said. That's what I said. And Red Larch was one of those things that Teos had in the notes already. It's got lots of hooks. So again, if you are a game master that wants the toolbox to make your own stuff with, you've got all of these hooks here, ways to hook the characters into the story, and then ways to hook the story into what goes forward from there. Tons of great information like that.
And it isn't that it's geographically so much bigger than Phandalin. It just has so much more going on. And you are given great hooks and really interesting bits, right? The tavern is dynamic. It has a number of dynamic things that can happen inside of it. It has clues that can happen. And they have this great way of breaking things up where it'll in bold and italics say rumors of evil if it's something for the third level and beyond PCs, or trouble in red larch if it's for the lower level characters. And so depending on what level you're playing at, you run one or the other. The other thing it does, very similar to Tyranny of Dragons, is factions. Lots of people in this town are tied to factions. You are encouraged to be a member of a faction as well going in. And so there's a lot of this like, oh, you're Zentarum as well. Well, let's do our, secret sign and, tell you, welcome to Z-Town. Here's what I can tell you about what's going on and rumors I've given you, which gives you that feeling of membership in something and alliances and secrets going on in a very nice way. And yeah, I love, this is to me one of the best towns in D&D's history across all editions. I would have no problem if someone says that it's the best, and I might be drawn to say it's the best because it's just so well done. It's really a great town.
Yeah. And that idea of factions and getting information and having connections via factions is handled in the end as well. If you want to run this in Eberron, if you want to run this in these other regions, you can't use the Zentarum in Eberron. So how do you do that? And they do a nice job of recognizing the importance of that and then spreading that out throughout as a tool again in this toolbox for game masters that may want to move it to a different world.
Yeah. I started our party when I ran this. I ran it at first level, and their favorite part of it by far were the low level adventures. They are surprisingly good, easy to run short quests, lots of interesting things going on, whether it's the NPC or, what are these magic stones doing in this room, or just lots of engagement there. That even though our middle school group was quick to try to murder any townsperson they thought was suspicious, as kids may be wont to do, there was a lot that kept them going, kept them interested. And so that was really very fun. To see the beginnings of the cult and the things like, the town has a group of citizens who have decided to do what needs to be done for the town's interest, which may sometimes include murderizing somebody who's in the way of what they think is town progress. And they've fallen under the sway of an earth cultist. And so that is creating a lot of problems, and you can find that and root out those problems. And that was really neat. Even as middle school kids, they were really good at sort of figuring out, all right, here's how we need to work with, the constable to sort this out and create new leadership in the town. There was a lot that was great about those low level adventures.
Yeah, I like them specifically if you are going to start a campaign at something other than first level. If you're going to start at third level, it's not like you're starting at 10th level. So third level is close enough to the beginning of a character's career and story that you sort of almost want to go back and start at first level.
Yeah.
I think some players don't want it, but I think most players do. If they're in a campaign, want that story to start at the beginning. And so I like that these little adventure hooks and adventures are there. And I like that they are so simple. You don't want to overcomplicate first and second level adventures. You don't want to necessarily skip them, but you also don't want to take 20 hours and 5 sessions to get there, because first level characters are squishy. First level characters don't have all of their power yet, so they don't have all their tools yet. So you want to embed them in the story without overpowering them time-wise or challenge-wise. And these did just that.
Yeah, it's a really good thing to look at design-wise, examples of those kinds of adventures. The cults themselves are really interestingly done. I talked about how I love the monsters, but they're just so thematic. And I'm holding up a picture of 3 different water cultists, and they have these interesting aspects to them, and the concepts of what the leaders look like and what they're doing It's both visually captured and in their stat blocks. Like I talked about the Razor Blast exploding when it's defeated, but also just each of the prophets is very neatly detailed. All of these different foes are really quite interesting and thematic. And the locations are nicely done thematically so that everything feels like it's draped in this theme of the elemental cult. And that gives it a very strong unifying concept. You're not going to be in the dungeon of the air elementals and think that somehow this is fire. Like, it's really nicely done.
Yeah. I did not purchase this adventure early on D&D Beyond.
Mm-hmm.
And so, 4 years after it came out, I'm on D&D Beyond as I'm designing, looking for monsters to use. Mm-hmm. And I would always do the search, and it would always come up with this really cool sounding elemental humanoid. I'm like, oh, this is perfect. This is exactly what I need. So I'd click on it, and then they would say, you do not own this. You have to. So then I go, oh, I still had the hardcover. So I'd go to the hardcover and I'd look. And finally, I just bought it on D&D Beyond so I could have quick and easy access to it because they are so thematic. They are so well done. Yeah. And they came at the perfect time. Like you said, with the player-facing stuff, they came at the perfect time because dungeon masters were now looking for something other than the bandit, something other than the mage apprentice, right? Something else. Yeah. And this book is great for that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. The adventure has a great rhythm, and we've talked about this in our last two adventures, how important that is, that there's some sort of a rhythm to it. Makes it very easy for the DM to understand. Now, this adventure does complicate it a bit, but the rhythm it's aiming for is initially you're looking for clues. And it starts with the idea of gathering clues regarding a delegation from the dwarven city of Mirabar. And they've gone missing with valuable items, important people. There are also some sightings of strange cults. And so you're going to want to find out what happened to the Mirabar delegation, probably follow up some threads around where they were last seen, find some sites of battle, things like that. The thread is not very strong, I think, unfortunately. You think I don't want to make too easy and straightforward a clue. Well, this is a case where at least my players were very lost as to what they were trying to do and why. Eventually, you end up in one of 4 keeps. So first you're looking for clues. Now you find one of 4 keeps. These keeps are all older structures that have new inhabitants because the cult has taken over, and they're posing as being somebody else. So at first you might think they're bandits, but you will soon learn they're an elemental cult. It does sometimes complicate things a bit that you may have, like the leader of the air tower is actually somebody that's not altogether bad, but they've sort of fallen under the sway of the cult, and you can actually convince them out of it. Those things are not always clear in the design, but they're neat concepts. And the keeps themselves are reasonably interesting. Now each of those keeps has either in it or near it an entrance to an underground dungeon, formerly a dwarven complex and now connected to the other areas of these keeps. And those areas have been turned into elemental evil temples. So when you go into a keep, you may end up going down underground into the elemental evil temples. Those areas are all themed, and you. One of the things I think that's sort of complicated for running DMs is they're not sure. Gee, if my players, they just keep finding stuff, shouldn't they just keep going down? But the problem is the adventure isn't leveled for doing that. You are expected to really level-wise finish all 4 keeps, finish all 4 underground areas, then go 1 level down. Right. That's a little tricky, right? A little tougher for DMs, and I think that could have had a little more hand-holding. But keeps, clues, keeps, underground. In the underground areas, you'll find at least one. You'll meet one of the prophets in the first elemental area you go to. So the 4 prophets are Iresi. Kalionoth, air, wields a spear, Windvane, and each of these magic items is keyed to what allows the elemental node to exist and is giving them a lot of their power. It drew them here. And so one of the questions is hey, what force put these weapons out there? And that's, the secret elder elemental evil kind of force that's organizing all of this. Vanifer for fire wields the dagger Tinderstrike. Gar Shatterkeel for water wields the trident Drown. And Marlos Urnrail, earth, wields the warpick Iron Fang. So you're going down in these areas, and it's an interesting design of it does to adapt based on what you've done before, Shawn.
Yeah. So like Teos said, you can really go to any of these to start, but once you deal with one of them, it affects what the other ones are going to do. So they will flee to the area below. And so you have to be careful, as Teos said, not to let them just keep going down and down and down, or otherwise they're going to get way in over their head way too fast. It also lets the other cults grow in power because you have defeated one, but the other ones have gone unchecked so far. Mm-hmm. So if the characters leave to rest after defeating one of the keeps, the cults are going to retaliate. So encounters will trigger attacks on towns, like what we saw in Tyranny of Dragons. But it's a little less flexible than what we saw in Tyranny. Mm-hmm. And then each elemental temple will obviously lead down into the fane of the Elder Elemental Eye, where the 3 remaining prophets have come to seek safety from these meddling adventurers. I too love the flow.
Yeah.
But like you said, it needs to be a light touch by the game master to make sure you're pointing people in the right direction. And one thing I liked, others might see as a drawback, is these dungeons are not small.
No.
They are meaty dungeons. Several of them, you're talking 30 at least locations within each dungeon, and there are several dungeons. So first you have the keeps, then you have the things, and then you get to the elemental nodes. And I think I don't mind a big dungeon. I don't think 5e supports the large dungeons as well as previous editions might have. So you have to keep track as the game master to make sure that it just doesn't turn into a check this room, fight the battle, check this room, fight the battle, check this room. Because if you get up to 7th or 8th level, your combats might be running 45 minutes to an hour. You're only getting through 4 rooms at a 4-hour session, and you've got 30 rooms to get through. It could turn tedious, so you're going to want to find ways to shorten it up, break it up, or just run it as is if that's what your players want.
Yeah, and I think a lot of these fights are not tiny fights. They're not quick fights.
Right.
They're often, like you said, meaty. And so when you have room after room of meaty fights, and we had this, I remember towards the end of where our campaign died with the middle school kids, they had entered the water temple, and, just coming in on a boat, they were attacked by, I don't know, an octopus and something else. And it was serious. And it took several sessions to just make progress in the water temple. And that's when I realized, oh, this is a really long time. It's an interesting book because this book compared, Tiamat feels so big, right? Tyranny of Dragons. Mm-hmm. We talked about how you tour the Sword Coast or the meated area there. And you do all these different missions, and it feels very big. This actually feels smaller, but I bet it has more fight time by far.
Well, if it goes up to 3 to 15, then you're talking, four more levels or so.
Yeah, I mean, and so did Tyranny, and technically go, 1 to 15, but there's just so much room after room here of fighting. 2 water weirds lurk in the stream, and then it's flying swords, and then it's Lizard King and their various other lizard folk, and a Grell, and it's just 4 specters, 2 hill giants. Every single thing every single room has something major in it. The whole Minotaur area, but there's some neat things. I love how the Minotaurs, especially I think once you get to the Fane begins to have these interesting interactions. Like the Minotaurs breathe fire because they've been blessed. And some of them are awaiting their blessings even. And so there are nice little story bits that the DM can try to figure out how to impart that story, but just really neat concepts that are going on and engaging bits. And so I think that's, if I were to run this again, I would shorten some of those early temples and just get them to those levels to then get down below and experience it and find some reasons. What, you can argue both things. Like someone will say, well, what they should have done is the typical, you've got to get, all 4 elemental keys, then you can get to the Fane. Or this doesn't do that. It gives you the freedom to travel whichever way you want, though that has its own drawbacks, right? And so it's tough. But I think really in the Fane and then the elemental nodes, you get these really neat concepts. We also have a thing, once you get to the Fane and you rest, because you're, of course, going to go in here, face a lot of danger, probably come back to town. So we again have in chapter 5, a number of additional things that can happen around the various towns from remaining cults. Like there's a case where one of the towns basically embraces elemental earth because they're like, well, everything's so dangerous. We feel like we have to say yes to the cult. And you can try to argue otherwise, which is great.
Yeah. Yeah. And so again, the word I keep coming back is toolbox. Use this as a toolbox, including what should be the just go through the dungeon part. Figure out the pace. If you look at the design of newer adventures, go to Dragon Delves, go to things like that. A lot of the dungeons are like 8 rooms, 6 rooms, 8 rooms, 10 rooms, because that is a more reasonable expectation for players of 5th edition now to be able to focus their way through before they start to feel like they are just trapped in this dungeon doing the grinding. That it's not necessarily why you play TTRPGs.
Right. Yeah. The ratio of payoff, right? It's like you have to go through 30 rooms of the water cult to say that you've defeated the water cult. You can have that same payoff in 15 rooms and then focus on making them interesting rooms can be better. But that's where, this was a new edition, right? And still everybody's figuring out how to do it. Once you've gone through the Fane, which is a little bit interesting, right? You do these elemental temples, then you go to the Fane, and you think that might lead to the end narratively. But no, it leads to 4 elemental nodes, which are areas of actual land, normal, but they've been somehow sucked into a node, sort of, and transformed in ways. And so we get these 4 nodes: Howling Caves, Plunging Torrents, Black Geode, Weeping Colossus. So it's back to that sort of elemental theming. They are still pretty big maps and neat maps. I mean, these are my favorite parts of the adventure. You have really interesting locations, super cool monster and scenes, and all kinds of wild things. Like there can be, a water bubble that you touch it and it pulls you in and starts taking you somewhere else, and some really interesting concepts that are going on. There are some tricky encounters in each of these elemental nodes. Its natural conclusion is a room where 3 states are supported. Story-wise, the more practical one is that the prophet is here trying to pull forth the elemental prince that they worship.
Right.
But that only happens if this prophet is alive, and based on the number of prophets that are alive, that are remaining. So you'll either face a prophet if it's alive and 2 other prophets, and 2 prophets remain total, or a prophet and an elemental prince if this is the final prophet that you're facing off against, because they had enough time to summon the actual elemental priest, or monsters if this prophet has been defeated already. So the room describes all 3 of those scenarios and walks you through it probably more clearly than I have. And the idea is, if there is a prophet here, well, regardless, you must defeat whoever's here, and you must hurl the prophet's mighty magic item through the portal. Once you do this in all 4 of these elemental nodes, elemental evil has been defeated, because those elemental princes can no longer traverse through these portals, and Team Evil is done. Any remaining cultists will flee, and the monsters will disband, and so on.
Yeah, that sums it up. I can't really add much to that other than it's a really epic story.
Yeah.
And if you're telling that epic story, you need to make sure your pacing is right. And I think early it's paced well. And in the end, you as the game master need to make sure that you get that pacing correct, giving the right amount of focus to not just the dungeons and the elemental nodes and everything, but what's going on in the towns as well.
Yeah. One fun historical thing is that these adventures were valid for Adventurers League play. And one of the early tests of Adventurers League was, hey, players would start playing this. They'd manage to really quickly get to the elemental place where they could face off against the leader that just happened to have the most powerful artifact available. And then, oh no, their campaign would fall apart so that they weren't able to throw that weapon through the portal. They had to keep it on their character and use it to destroy every encounter they faced. That went out for far too long before finally the AL admin said, okay, no, you don't get to keep these adventures. You know, you can only use them when you're in the story. The moment you leave this, you must give this up because it's too destructive to have everybody, you know, fighting with these adventures at every table.
One of the joys of organized play. So we have wrapped up Princes of the Apocalypse, and I think next time, Teos, I think we need to talk about the Temple of Elemental Evil if we're going to continue our process of looking at the adventure and then the adventure that spawned it.
Love it.
So let's do that. And so thank you for sharing your expertise, and thank you to all those listeners out there. We really do appreciate you taking the time to listen to us rant and rave and discuss this love of the hobby of ours. You can help us out by becoming a patron of this show. You can go to patreon.com/masteringdnd and become a Master of Realms supporter, a Master of Dungeons supporter, or a Master of the Multiverse. And those folks are going to hear their names right now. Zewald Winfrey, Zach Tights, Chris Webster, Waterford Wizard, Javier Waziak, Jason Ward from Accidental Cyclops Games, Jason Ward, James Walton, Vidwicles G. Also check out photography services in Bergen, Norway. Marcelo de Velasquez, The Valiant DM, Joe Tyler, Ryan Truk, Trace, Jeremy Talaman from the D&D and TV podcast, Talos the Stormlord, Josh and Lee Wanika of the Tabletop Journeys podcast, Jeff Stevens at jeffstevensgames.com, Spark from Dunor Games, Tim Smith, Krishna Simos, Andy Shockney, Chance Russo at Drago Russo, Runner Rick, Ozymandias Rex, Vladimir Printer from Croatia, Robert Pasley, Ricardo Who Might Adventure, Post Fiction RPG Audio, Frog Prince at Tentacle Squelching Wetly, Philip and Lindsay, Phil Wirt from the Philadelphia Area Gaming Expo, DT Norris of DT and Dragons, Tom Nelson of the Deck of Player Safety, Falcon Neal, Sean Molly, John Mickey, Michael, Trey McLemore, Anna B. Meyer of Fantasy Cartography, Eric Mengi, Jared from Mathis Arcanum, The Mathemagician, Paul Mata, Chad Lynch, Gail Curmandy, Jim Klingler, Brian King, JT Evans, JR of the Twilight Perspective, The Mighty Jerd, Mark and Mary's Gaming Compound, the Jaunty Mantis TTRPG Podcast, Hyperlexic, Sean Hurst, Ben Heisler and Paige Laitman, Scott Fitzgerald Gray at Insane Angel Studios, James Fisher, Andy Edmonds at Nerdronomicon.com, Will Doyle, Kevin Davis, Evan at Nimbleco, Evil John, Dead Inertia DM, Kevin Criswell, Robo Ballin, Calvin Bridges Avalos, Boss John from Duality Press, Merrick Blackman, Steve Bissonette, Derek the Bearded GM, David Bastiansen, Rudy Chainsaw Basso, Craig Bailey, Lou Anders of Lazy Wolf Studios, Keith Ammon of The Monsters Know What They're Doing, and Agile Monk of Fantasy Companion Workshops. Thank you all so much for your support. Teos, where can people find you and your work on the webs?
Ooh, find me at alphastream.org. There's a new video on 5-room learn to play for Draw Steel. So if you've ever been curious about that system, this is how to learn to play it and how to teach people to play it in just 5 rooms. Shawn, where are you hiding?
I am hiding at Shawn Merwin on all the socials. You can follow the podcast at Mastering D&D on those very same socials. And you can go to YouTube, youtube.com/@masteringdungeons, and you can help us out by liking, subscribing, commenting, doing all the thumbs and the things. And that's all I've got. So we have survived not just one, not just two, not just three, but all 4 of these evil elements. What are we going to do now?
Write a completely derivative work that is just princes of the para-elemental apocalypse and profit.
Yep. I am going to fall victim. Yeah. I'm going to fall victim to the element called old age.
That is the worst of the elements. That prince is no fun.
No fun at all.